Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We're here tonight to talk about Project 2025 impacts on AAUW values 1 year later and how to stop ongoing implementation. My name is Amy Hom. I am one of the directors of public policy at AAUW California.
Hi, everyone. My name is Missy Maseko. I am the second part of the directorship of AAUW California Public Policy. And we are very happy that you are here with us tonight. So what we're going to be doing tonight is, well, our session will be divided into three parts. The first part, we will go through Project 2025 and AAUW public policy priorities. So some of you were here with us last year in October 2024. It was either a year ago or 10 years ago. I'm not sure. It kind of feels like it's been a long time. We presented you some of the ways last year that Project 2025 would impact AAUW's values and our public policy priorities if it were implemented. And we also were pushing back against the popular narrative at the time that if elected, Heritage Foundation aligned politicians, including Donald Trump, if they won, that this would actually be implemented because there was some pushback against that a year ago. So it's 1 year later, and we're going to give you a little bit more now about the speed and the success with which this administration has actually implemented many of the things that we talked about a year ago. But that would be mean of us to just give you all of the bad things. And so in the second part, and actually interspersed throughout the first section, we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do to resist, right? To do push back. So we'll give you concrete suggestions for collective action, things that help slow down and resist implementation. And we'll focus on how part of that is passage of California Proposition 50. All of this, right, the speed of this implementation, it can be really, really scary, but it's important to understand that part of it in order to understand how we can meaningfully take action to resist and to push back against it. So in the last part of section 2, we'll also touch a little bit on resilience. So rather than feeling depressed or helpless, our goal is to provide you with information that can help you think about avenues for action and remind you that self-care is also a political act. In the very last section, which we probably will only dedicate the last 5 to 10 minutes on, we'll have an open question and answer session. So please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we'll be monitoring those throughout. But really, our goal tonight is to give you information, but leave you feeling more empowered and more equipped with concrete tools and pathways for action than you have when you came into the session tonight. So I'll turn it over to Amy to get us started on the first part of the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Missy. So the following slides were originally presented in October of last year to outline some of the ways that we felt Project 2025 could impact AAUW's public policy priorities. The details and the page numbers were pulled directly from the 900-page book, Mandate for Leadership 2025. And to that presentation from last year, we've now added texts and links in blue to update the predictions that we made a year ago with the specific actions that have been taken since Trump came into office in January. A significant amount of our Project 2025 predictions from last year have already been implemented. But we want to make sure that we leave enough time tonight to talk about what we can do to take action and resist. So we're only going to touch on some of the ways that Project 2025 has been implemented. And if you're interested in digging into the details, we invite you to spend time reviewing the linked information in blue font. As most of you know, AAUW California public policy priorities consist of 4 pillars: equal access to quality education for all students, economic security for all women, social and racial justice for all members of society, and increased representation of women in leadership roles. Project 2025 directly impacts all 4 public policy priority pillars. We're going to start with the first public policy priority pillar, equal access to quality education for all students. AAUW advocates vigorous enforcement of Title IX, a federal law that was passed in 1972 to ensure that all students are treated fairly and that gender is not a factor in educational access and success. In April 2024, new Title IX regulations were issued under the Biden administration to provide expanded protections for campus sexual assault survivors and to expand Title IX protections against sex and gender-based harassment and discrimination in order to protect LGBTQ+ students and pregnant and parenting students. Down in federal court, and the Department of Education confirmed that it would enforce Trump-era 2020 Title IX regulations, rolling back the protections that had been put in place by the Biden administration. Project 2025 laid out plans to dismantle the Department of Education, and this was done by executive order in March. Project 2025 called for reversing the Title IX definition of sex, which under the Biden rules had included sexual orientation and gender identity. This was done by executive order in January on Trump's first day in office. Project 2025 called for legislation requiring schools to refer to students by the names on their birth certificates and pronouns associated with their sex assigned at birth. This was done by executive order in January. Project 2025 called for prioritizing the rights of the accused in sexual assault and harassment cases, and this was done with the reversal of the Title IX rules to the 2020 rules. And Title IX enforcement has now been reoriented to focus on trans women in sports, detracting from all of the other enforcement actions like sex-based harassment and discrimination against pregnant and parenting students. AAUW advocates adequate and equitable funding at all levels of education. Project 2025 calls for phasing out Title I, which provides funds to schools serving low-income students. The Trump FY26 education budget proposal eliminates $700 million from Title I programs. And a leaked proposal reveals plans to fully eliminate the Head Start program, which provides early childhood education and services to low-income children and families. AAUW opposes public funds for non-public and charter schools that do not meet public school civil rights and accountability standards. Project 2025 laid out plans to promote charter schools and school choice. There are now 15 states with limited voucher programs where eligibility is based on income or disability, and 18 states have universal voucher programs that are available to any student regardless of income level and can be used for private schools. Oversight of charter programs has been reduced, and HR 1, the budget mega bill, includes a tax credit for a national school voucher program. AAUW advocates access to diverse staff and curriculum that represents historically accurate information. Project 2025 called for a federal Parents' Bill of Rights, which would enable parents to sue public schools for curricula that offends them, such as gender studies or studies about systemic racism. Companion bills HR 650 and S 204 were passed in January 2025 to establish parental rights. Meanwhile, in June 2025, the Supreme Court decision in the case Mahmoud v. Taylor allows parents to opt their children out of curricula that they don't like. And there's an article that's linked here about the Mahmoud case that was written by Missy, explaining the harms of opt-outs to students and to schools. Project 2025 set out to censor academic discussions about race, gender, and systemic oppression. This censorship has been bolstered by an executive order signed in January, which defunds schools that teach about racism and other systemic inequality. And an executive order signed in April directed the Department of Education to remake the college accreditation system, suspending or terminating accreditors who include DEI among their accreditation standards. The purpose of altering the accreditation system is to protect faith-based institutions from having to adopt DEI policies. And instead, it allows states to create their own more politically pliable creditors. AAUW supports legislation that would make college more affordable for all students. Project 2025 set forth to end loan forgiveness programs. The Department of Education under the Trump administration has been delaying loan forgiveness for many borrowers who have met the requirements for loan forgiveness. And the American Federation of Teachers is now asking for a court injunction to force the department to follow the law. And HR 1, the budget mega bill, ends the SAVE program, which lowers monthly payments on student loans based on income level. Now I'm going to turn it over to Missy to talk about some of the ways that we can resist.
So, I told Amy, I'm like, do I just come in and you're a bad news bear and I'm good news bear? And I guess that's how we're working together. So I think everything Amy laid out is clear that Project 2025 implementation, especially when it comes to our public policy priorities around education, is barreling forward very quickly. So what are we doing? What has AAUW California been doing to protect that equal access to quality education for all students in the face of this implementation? So we have continually advanced a legislative agenda that expands protections or that attempts to shield with state law Californians from some of the most egregious walk back of civil rights and other protections that are embedded in Project 2025. So we are taking strong opposed positions on certain bills, bills like AB 89. So AAUW California has not commonly taken opposed positions in advancing our legislative agenda, but this year we felt it was necessary. When I say we, I mean the Public Policy Committee, who comes together to set our legislative agenda based on our public policy priorities each year. AB 89 would have required the California Interscholastic Federation to amend its constitution and bylaws and policies to prohibit any student whose sex was assigned male at birth from participating on a girls' interscholastic sports team, which mirrors bills that have been advanced and passed in other states. And we successfully opposed that bill, which died in committee. A bill that's not up here, but that Amy reminded me of today is AB 1955, which was signed into law last year in 2024. And that bill was a first in the nation bill, and we were very proud to support it. It prohibits public schools from notifying parents if their child uses a different name or pronoun or identifies as a different gender than assigned at birth. And so, again, AAUW California was very proud to have been part of the effort to pass and have AB 1955 signed into law. The other things we're doing with our legislative agenda, and these are just a small sliver of examples of protecting California's, is advancing bills like AB 1035, and this is on the governor's desk, which extends eligibility for funding for the College California Promise by 2 years. That program provides free tuition to approximately 1 million community college students, and is a pathway as someone that works at the CSUs, as a pathway for students getting into four-year universities as well. Uh, that's our legislative agenda. We also have the fantastic school board project, which provides tools for you to help us enforce California laws that directly challenge these kinds of federal mandates that are really antithetical to what we have advanced at the state level in California. So through your presence at school board meetings, you can help us make sure that California law is enforced within local school districts, including, AB 1078, which passed in 2023, which prevents the censorship of historically accurate information about marginalization based on race, gender, and systemic oppression. And that's, when school boards attempt to ban books or make curricular changes that eliminate that accurate history. So we've got a lot of things going on to push back, and we are actively resisting that implementation. I'll turn it back over to Amy to give you more of the bad news before I pop in to give you more of the good news. But that is some of the ways that we have been pushing back.
Thanks, Missy. Now we're going to get into the second public policy priority pillar, economic security for all women. One of AAUW's core tenets under economic security is equity in the workplace. Project 2025 called for reorienting the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, to prioritize religious liberty. This has happened, with religious liberty now being the main priority area for the EEOC. And even worse, EEOC commissioners and lawyers have been fired, and EEOC priorities have been redirected not only to prioritize religious liberty, but also to focus on investigating DEI-motivated race and sex discrimination and anti-American national origin bias and discrimination. All of this turns the mission of the EEOC on its head, undermining decades of EEOC focus on enforcement of workplace equity. Project 2025 called for gutting DEI programs in the workplace. Trump signed several executive orders when he first took office, including rescinding previous DEI protections and punishing corporations and nonprofits with DEI programs. AAUW advocates enforcement of workplace anti-discrimination statutes. On his first day in office, Trump signed an executive order to recognize two sexes, male and female, based on characteristics at conception. This denies the civil rights of transgender people. Project 2025 called for the elimination of the EEOC mandatory data collection of Title VII violations. As of now, data collection is still happening, but the EEOC acting chair, Andrea Lucas, has made it clear that employers may not use race or sex disparities revealed in their employment data as a basis for policies that might give preference based on sex, race, ethnicity, or other protected characteristics. In other words, the administration considers it discriminatory to promote DEI practices. The definition of sex and the definition of discrimination are both being challenged by the Trump administration. And as we've previously mentioned, the EEOC is now focused on religious rights as their main priority. AAUW advocates security and retirement. Project 2025 called for moving toward Medicare Advantage, the more restrictive and privatized Medicare option. The Trump administration has dramatically increased payment rates for Medicare Advantage, putting their finger on the scale in favor of privatization. Project 2025 called for repeal of the Medicare drug price negotiation program under the Inflation Reduction Act in order to restore private sector negotiations. and Trump signed an executive order which weakened the Medicare negotiation program. This is going to result in increased costs to the Medicare system and to enrollees. AAUW advocates access to quality, affordable childcare. Project 2025 called for the elimination of Head Start, and the Trump administration is pursuing reductions in federally funded childcare programs. They're looking to cut positions at Head Start, which helps fund daycare for low-income families, and they're also looking for ways to eliminate tax credits for daycare. Back over to you, Missy.
So, what are we doing? I'm not going to go point by point, but this is just some of the examples again of legislation that we've been advancing in California that shields Californians against federal impacts, at least to a certain degree. So some of the things that we've advanced in 2025, advancing bills like AB 700. This directly counters some of something that overlaps between the first pillar that we covered in this one, and that is something that establishes a student loan forgiveness program within the Student Aid Commission that authorizes up to $10,000 in forgiveness of state loans for a person who serves 10 years in public service. With all of the statistics that we know about student debt and women that hold student debt into their later in life in their career path, this is critical for thinking about economic security. We also have worked hard to get bills like AB 2123 signed into law last year in 2024. That is a law that removes the requirement for an employee who takes paid family leave to use 2 weeks of their unused vacation time before receiving disability. And so helping folks achieve both work-life balance and being able to actually take leave time that they deserve. So, in addition to legislation, state level legislation, AAUW California and AAUW overall has always maintained the Start Smart and Work Smart programs that continue to educate women about their rights in the workplace. And also then through National has maintained its focus on raising awareness around the gender pay gap, which it continues to actually not improve. That simply having that information allows to have reliable information in an environment where also data collection is being problematized at the federal level. And one thing that we're going to talk about at the end is we're also working on a plan to start focusing on hyper-local anti-discrimination protections. And we'll talk about that a bit more near the end of the webinar. So back to you, Amy.
Now we'll get into the third public policy priority pillar, social and racial justice for all members of society. Self-determination and reproductive health is one of the core tenets of AAUW. In his first week in office, Trump issued an executive order to rescind 2 executive orders issued by President Biden after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which sought to protect abortion access. The Trump executive order doesn't immediately reverse the previous policies, but it does clearly signal that the administration is coming after access to abortion. Project 2025 called for prohibiting funds for Planned Parenthood. In July 2025, Planned Parenthood in California, the largest abortion provider in the state, lost all federal funding due to H.R. 1, the budget megabill, prohibiting Medicaid reimbursements for large nonprofit abortion providers. The defunding of Planned Parenthood will disproportionately impact low-income residents. And the Department of Health and Human Services is now reviewing ways to restrict access to mifepristone. AAUW advocates equal access to quality, affordable health care, housing, and a healthy environment. Project 2025 threatened Medicaid funding cuts. HR 1, the budget mega bill, cuts Medicaid funding and imposes work requirements. Work requirements involve complex reporting and verification systems every month. And the red tape is going to lead to coverage loss for people who are working but unable to navigate the system. Project 2025 called for ending green subsidies. Trump signed an executive order in July directing federal agencies to expedite the phase out of tax credits for wind, solar, and other green industries. And Trump withdrew the US from the Paris Agreement within hours after taking office. AAUW advocates the guarantee of civil and constitutional rights for all, including all forms of gender equity and expression and all family structures. Project 2025 called for the dismantling of policies promoting DEI, gender justice, and racial justice. On his first day in office, Donald Trump signed 2 executive orders to end DEI programs. He called DEI illegal, immoral, and contrary to the country's civil rights laws, asserting that DEI policies and programs promote race and sex-based preferences or quotas. Project 2025 called for the rescission of regulations prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics. On his first day in office, Trump rescinded a Biden executive order that prohibited discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. AAUW advocates protection and expansion of voting rights. Project 2025 called for the dismantling of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, which is responsible for enforcing the Voting Rights Act. The Trump administration has reshaped the Civil Rights Division, changing its focus from civil rights enforcement to enforcement of Trump's executive orders. And 70% of the division's lawyers have left in a mass exodus.
So, what do we got going on to resist on this front? What has AAUW California been doing? So here I'll focus on, again, some of our legislative agenda. A lot of our legislative agenda, honestly, has been focused on education, the education pillar and this pillar, as places to shore up civil rights protections. And so I'll give you, and reproductive freedom. So I'll give you a few examples of things that we've been advancing. So we're advancing bills like SB 418, which is, again, another bill that is this year, and this one is definitely, we're pushing hard to get the governor to sign this one. This would prohibit a health service provider from denying coverage for services based upon race, color, national origin, age, disability, or sex, including sexual preference or gender identity, intersex traits, and pregnancy. And as Amy reported in Project 2025 implementation, that means that classes and categories of people who had historically been covered under discrimination protection have been rolled back, and therefore advancing bills like and passing bills like SB 418 are critical for protecting those kinds of discrimination protections in California. We're also getting bills like AB 260, which Amy referenced on an earlier slide, and SB 627 into law. These were signed this year. So AB 260 helps protect privacy rights around mifepristone, and that's, very, very important, especially given the potential for increased regulation around medical abortion. SB 626 is another first in the nation bill that requires law enforcement officers, including ICE, to unmask when engaged in the kinds of, I don't know, can we call it law enforcement that they are engaged in at this moment. So that is an important piece of legislation, especially given the way that It's already been ruled on by the Supreme Court in terms of the interpretation of racial profiling. So those are important. We also are continuing to, as I said, advance many pieces of legislation that protect reproductive freedoms. And a reminder that this included us working very hard to create educational materials for the public and campaign around Proposition 1 in 2022 in California. So we now have in California the constitutional right to reproductive freedom, which is, again, very important when you see the kind of state by state differences in how abortion is defined and protected. That's a few of the things we've been doing, and I'll turn it back over to Amy to give you one more pillar of sadness.
Thanks, Missy. Our final pillar is increased representation of women in leadership roles. AAUW advocates increased representation of women in leadership roles. And Project 2025 undermines this policy directive and would result in even fewer women rising to leadership roles because of all the ways that we talked about tonight, in which women would be economically marginalized and unable to sustain educational access. This is doubly true for non-white, non-heteronormative women. According to the recently released Census Bureau data, in 2024, women working full-time year-round were paid 81 cents for every dollar paid to men. This is the second year in a row that the gender pay gap has grown. And here's a statement from AAUW CEO Gloria Blackwell that instead of addressing this crisis, this administration is doing the opposite, systematically dismantling the very protections meant to ensure workplace equity.
So on this front, we don't have a lot of legislative angles because even though we have an executive order that claims that our civil rights legislation allows for quotas, they don't. So we can't actually pass legislation that that would, save so many seats for women in leadership roles. That's not actually how it works. And so we don't have a ton of legislative angles to advance that kind of, representation. But what we do support is legislation that institutionalizes things that we know help marginalized folks get into those positions. And that's things like leadership training and mentorship programs that help folks move the whole way through their educational career and then move into the workplace. Something that AAUW already does in supporting programs for younger women that advance them in leadership, including Tech Trek, as a program that starts earlier and earlier. So we try to think about how we have either internal programs or can support and advance funding for external programs that allow women to advance and gain connections and skills the whole way through their educational and early career cycles. So Tech Trek, Nick Whistle as leadership conference and networking opportunities for college women and student leaders, the continuation of AAUW scholarships and fellowships, and then again, right, California-based mentorship and leadership training programs like Build and Bridge. So that's some of what we've been doing at AAUW California. And just to address something that in the midst of this that's in the chat, we do have, so a question was asked about when the last day is for the governor to sign bills for this year, and that's October 12th. And so we have a campaign around SB 418 and some of our other bills. It's available on ResistBot, it's available on Blue Sky, and if you're interested in action alerts, we'll also include a place where you can sign up for that so that we can send you alerts to act on these bills, especially in the next week. So that is a great segue to what you can do. So I'm telling you already, and I've been interspersing throughout, what AAUW California has already been doing with our legislative agenda, giving a nod to what national is doing. But now, what can you do? Now, part of our role at the state level is providing resources for you and providing resources for branches to be able to do public policy work. And part of this is, right, helping us, one, advance our legislation. Okay, so we'll give you a link to these slides. You can access our bill tracking report, and we'll make sure to connect you with our other places where our petitions are posted. They're always in public policy news. But here, things that you can do year round, of course, is participate in lobby days in the spring. But year round, we have action alerts that help advance our agenda. And we usually send those out at specific moments so that the energy of AAUW California members is targeted at certain committees or certain people at certain times of the year so that we get a huge influx of support for certain pieces of legislation as they move through different committees to get them out of certain committees or to get them to the governor's desk. What you'll have in the next week is continued posts and requests to try to get, especially our high priority legislation, um, off of the governor's desk and signed into law. And that is, I think we still have 13 bills there. Is that correct, Amy?
Yep.
Yep, we've had 13 bills there since last week, so please give him a call. Tell him to get them off of his desk and into law. So that's one thing that you can help us do. Um, we can, I have on here, reach out if you encounter California legislation that you think fits our public policy priorities, but that's not on our legislative agenda. We always get a few pieces of legislation added to our agenda throughout the legislative cycle, and that's from March to October, because we have wonderful members who are paying close attention to pieces of legislation, of the thousands of pieces. Then you help us figure out that this piece over here we might have missed on the first pass really should be on our agenda. So please don't hesitate to you watch what's moving through and reach out to us, because what we set as our agenda in March, we always leave a little bit of wiggle room to add things that are particularly salient or important or that really meet the moment with what we need to advance our public policy agenda. And in the summer and fall, you can also contact us if you think that there is an issue that is about gender equity related to our public policy priorities that is not yet regulated by California law, but you think could be addressed using a legislative solution. Because your idea could be our next AAUW California authored bill. Uh, our ideas come from you. And so please, we invite you, if there's something that you think needs to be addressed, then you should reach out and let us know. And then that's something that we can look into, research, and potentially write, which is always, um, you know, really great accomplishment for AAUW California and for the people that that legislation impacts. So we've talked a lot about legislation, but that's not the only thing that you can do to help resist. So one thing that we have going on right now is a Get Out the Vote campaign. And so part of resistance is voting, getting the vote out, and we're asking our members to educate about the positive impacts of Proposition 50 in this election cycle. So we have a ton of materials that you can use to help do voter outreach for the special election this year in California on November 4th. So it has our standard get out the vote material like voting logistics, polling places, how to make sure you're registered, where are your ballots, right? How to follow up on them. But it also includes Proposition 50 materials with a focus on delivering reliable, nonpartisan information, but really kind of emphasizing the positive impacts of Proposition 50. And part of that is, connecting the passage of Proposition 50 with everything that we're talking about tonight. Project 2025 is federal encroachment on, right, things that California and Californians have already advanced and passed as meaningful and important to the state, as well as to AAUW California, in terms of our core mission and values. So Proposition 50 is important to us because this is something that can help us continue to advance our public policy priorities and our mission. And as you saw tonight, a lot of those public policy priorities, those legislative solutions, really do push back against Project 2025 implementation at the state level. So that's part of, right, this campaign for Proposition 50. The other part of it is really kind of entering this hyper partisan environment that's filled with misinformation, with kind of very level, fact based kind of information about Proposition 50 and Project 2025. Because you can frame it as something that is not inherently partisan. And I'll talk about that in a second. But supporting Prop 50, it it can be a nonpartisan thing, and it's something that can help us preserve wider democratic norms in California, oppose that implementation of Project 2025, and continue to advance our public policy priorities. So I'm going to answer two frequently asked questions because these also came up in the registration for this webinar. And one is, won't the passage of Prop 50 negatively impact democracy by walking back people-centered redistricting, right? Is that something that Proposition 50 is going to do? Because there are competing discourses about democracy also in the materials around advancing Proposition 50. And I would say that the competing discourses on democracy are really based on, okay, say context and focus, right? So what does that mean? So, with the passage of Prop 50, Californians will experience a short-term loss of democratic, people-centered control of that aspect of democracy in California, redistricting. Short-term, temporary. Short-term, temporary loss. But with the passage of Prop 50, Californians will potentially have more control over other democratic norms that are currently being violated, like troops in the streets, censorship of speech, attempts to erase historical facts, the overlooking or eradication of science and science in decision making, and decisions that endanger the well being of women and girls and that dehumanize important members of our community. So, temporary loss of redistricting, the passage of Prop 50 will allow us to have more control over other things that are important to a pluralistic democratic society and to democratic norms. The other question that we get frequently is partisanship. Is a discussion of, the negative aspects of Project 2025, reporting on the facts of Project 2025 implementation, is that partisan? Is focusing on positive impacts of Proposition 50 inherently partisan? Is redistricting inherently partisan? So, you know, no, right? Then here's why. We know that redistricting efforts might have seemingly partisan benefits, but in the current political environment, we have to really think about what gets labeled as partisan. As an organization, our public policy priorities come from all of us, and they have been very consistent over a long period of time. So we hold certain positions and we advance certain priorities as an organization. I don't think that we would stop or start holding that mission and those priorities based on what party A or party B says. In a polarized political environment, taking a position on something like gender equity can seem like partisanship, but we would hold and have held these positions and advance these priorities for a long time, regardless of how they have or have not aligned with partisan messaging and partisan platforms. If we align with a certain partisan platform, it is temporary and incidental because what we are doing is what we have been doing, right? Advancing one mission and a set of public policy priorities, and that's what we're focused on. So labeling things like that as and preserving democracy as partisan seems very reductive. And instead, if we focus on the actual things that we are doing, right, that partisan labeling is problematic, right, and really incidental. And I hope that that addresses at least some of the concerns about the labeling of partisanship. So, um, I don't see, let me see. Right. Um, I just see another good point by Claudia in the Q&A, right? Is that Proposition 50 is a vote by the people, right? Thanks, Claudia. Um, so that's let I don't see any other questions about Prop 50. So I'm going to give you a few more things and then we'll open it up for any other questions. So other ways you can resist. We're creating some new projects for you. And these are focusing on hyper local policy impacts. So we're in the process of building out the City Council Action and Monitoring Project, CCAMP, modeled on the school board project, which is about encouraging member engagement with and participation in and monitoring of local city councils, city council meetings, board of supervisors, depending on where you're located, to build relationships with them, to work in coordination with them, to advance AAUW goals. And we're working on some model policy language so we can ask very local jurisdictions to strengthen anti-discrimination protections locally. So this is based on the implementation of a bill that passed last year, SB 1340, and going out and not just right monitoring, but thanking city councils who have implemented this and who are implementing anti-discrimination protections. So that's something to look forward to. We're working on that now, and we're planning on rolling that out later this year and early next year. So we have a national, right? National is doing some really great work. And so don't forget to tap into what National is doing around federal rulemaking changes. So this is a place to kind of tap into some of the what I usually say is sneaky ways that, as Amy noted, the EEOC seems like it's like through the looking glass, right? Civil rights protections and enforcement almost seem turned on their head at the moment. And part of that is happening through federal agency rulemaking changes, which sounds really boring and mundane, and it is. And it's also a way that federal agencies like the Department of Energy and the Department of Labor are working to challenge and change the way that we think about and enforce civil rights protections through the rules of the agency. And so look for these alerts from National. They ask you to go engage in public comment to oppose the rule changes. And doing that helps one, slow them down, and two, builds out evidence that the public does not support what is happening, which allows for more robust legal challenges if these rules do pass and move into operation within the agencies. So we have some information here about those federal agency rulemaking processes and also AAUW National. We have a link to where you can follow when they pull up alerts and have asks for you about those rule changes. So, um, don't worry, I'm not done. See, you thought this was all going to be depressing, but no, because we have so many things for you to do. What can you do to resist? If this is all too much, we have targeted monthly actions in PP News, 1, 2, 3, every month, around a specific topic area. So you can take 3 actions. Anything you do, every contribution helps. And so those 3 actions are focused on something you can do as yourself, right? Which is usually focused on educating yourself about something. The second step is always about sharing that information with somebody that you know. That is one of the most effective ways to actually create change is to talk to somebody that you know, that already you have a relationship with, because that works a lot more effectively than kind of what is happening in our current public sphere. And step 3 is always about politically focused outreach. So something that we ask you to do to reach out to usually state level legislators. So look for that in every month of public policy news. And if it boils it down to 3 actions, and again, everything that you do helps. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about the very last thing that I promised, and that is thinking about collective action and coalitions, all the C's, communities and resilience. So, what a lot of what is happening now is meant to do is to make you feel overwhelmed, to make you feel disempowered, to make you feel afraid. This is all a common tactic that is used over and over again in democracies that are slipping away from democracy. And the way that you manage some of that is first, right? I've given you right, a quote by Audre Lorde, which is really important, but is taking care of yourself and sharing the weight with others. So let's focus on sharing the weight first. I encounter people all the time that tell me that there's so many things going on, they don't know where to focus their energy. Do you know where to focus your energy? I'll tell you where to focus your energy on whatever thing you want to. Focus it somewhere. You know why? Because you're sharing the weight with other people. So you build coalitions and community, work with other people who share similar values, work smarter, not harder. So, the State Public Policy Committee is working also at the organization level to build more coalitions so that we have groups that we're working with as well. And we're not overlapping our efforts, but we're doing slightly different things, working towards slightly different goals with a similar end. You can do that too in your own life, in the communities you work with. Just remember you're not alone. Build relationships to share also emotional labor and know that you and the work are supported when you need to take a break. And I'm very thankful for working with Amy. Amy and I get to check in all the time on these things. And it's really, really helpful to have somebody that we can share the emotional labor as well as the work that we do together. So I encourage you to find those people for you too. And that brings me to the second point of sharing the weight, and that's engage in collective action. It's really scary to be out front right now. And we don't have a ton of time, but I will tell you that I work in the CSU system and that there is now a federal investigation of the CSU system for things, including some of the things I teach, like gender studies, right? So engaging in collective action. Now, why is that relevant? Because when certain kinds of things are being targeted, right, it's reasonable to feel afraid, but collective action is really important because if only one person is out front saying how important this is, then that's one person that is very clear and easy to target. And if it's all of us together, then it makes it a lot harder to target one person, right, that has one voice. That's why I like my little fish organize image here, right? Collective action is critical. The second kind of big thing that Audre Lorde teaches us is centering self-care, right? Caring for yourself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Slow down when you need to take care of your mental and physical well-being. Remember, you're working in coalition and community. You have other people that have your back, and you have other people that are doing things too, right? If you need to check out for a few days and slow down, that's fine. Take care of yourself. And resilience training is something that is really useful. So I've given you a link to UC Davis's toolkit on well-being, wellness, and resilience, which has a lot of great free resources. And I gave you a link to a podcast that my company recorded a few months ago about resilience called How Can We Survive Today's Political Moment, as resources for thinking about how to be resilient and engage in longer term and long-term activism, especially in an environment where it seems like you're constantly under a fire hose of different kinds of things coming down the pipe. And the very last thing that I'll say is make a plan. And that is the last slide that we have for you that's content based. So based on all of the action opportunities we provided today, as you leave and we give you the link to these slides, what is one that you are the most interested in participating in personally to challenge Project 2025? And then just ask yourself, why did you choose that one? What tools and resources and guidance do you need, right, to make that a reality? What will you do to make sure you preserve your own well-being while you do it? And who is your community? Who can you look to for support? So make a plan, right? Pick a direction, make a plan. You don't have to solve everything. We are doing this work together. So I hope that you found that useful. We have 2 whole minutes for a Q&A, but I didn't see that many questions come up through the chat. So I think that is a great place to end. Amy, are these slides ready for me to share them in the chat?
Yes, I think they are. Let me just
Excellent.
stop sharing and I'm gonna do that right here.
Awesome. Then we will share the slides and you can go make a plan, and hopefully you found all of this incredibly useful, or at least not too depressing. um, all right, here you go. I think I got it, Amy. There's.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.